Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Today we have Matheus as our speaker. He's a postdoc at Harvard University, and today he's going to talk about transparency and security via algorithmic economics. Let's welcome.
Thank you everyone for coming. So today I'm going to talk about how my research on thinking about how we can use economic thinking and algorithmic economics in general to build secure systems. To start, I just want to briefly summarize the field of computational economics. So it has provided many contributions to computer science over the years. So in areas like online markets, since the internet became very big, a lot of online markets use economic reasoning to think about those markets. We have auctions, we have the sharing economy, which nowadays is called the gig economy, where you have Uber, Lyft, where economic incentives are very important on these markets. And most of you might not know, but even big tech companies like Google or Facebook, they make most of their revenue by auctioning advertisement. In all the areas, we have networks, where incentives in network formation is very important. And even more recently, we have blockchains, where they're essentially distributed systems, but economics plays a very important role on the security of blockchains. Often when we think about the security in a blockchain, often economics is very important to actually reason about the security of the systems. It's very different on how you think about cryptographic security. Blockchain, in general, they provide a very different flavor of security that often involves some economics. So why we care about thinking about economics in the internet age? So really because we spend a lot of our time interacting with internet platforms. So we go through internet platforms all the time. We are always on Google, or we might be shopping on eBay using platforms like Uber, Airbnb, Facebook, and others. And these platforms, they influence a lot of how we spend our time and what we get to consume and what we get to see on the internet. They have a lot of power over what we get to consume. And of course, we as the users, we have our own preference of what we want to take out of these platforms. Let me give you an example. So eBay runs auctions to sell items in the internet. In case of eBay, we have two types of users. We have buyers and we have sellers. eBay is making a link between these two types of agents. And eBay is going to set the rules of the game. eBay defines how this interaction is going to take place. And what's important to understand here is that when eBay is designing their rule, they have to think about the preference that buyers are gonna have on this when they go to the platform. In the case of an auction, buyers have their preference. They would be expressed via their valuation, which is how much they're willing to pay for some item. And of course, they are not going to simply tell you how much they're willing to pay. You have to incentivize them to review that information. For the seller side, though, the seller simply want to maximize revenue. And the platform also has to think about this, taking into account this incentive, like the seller is trying to maximize revenue. Well, you have to think, what can the seller try to manipulate your platform to take some advantage? So here one example on eBay showing what they call a shield bidding policy, where eBay explicitly have to tell sellers about the fact that they should not bid on their own auction to create a sense of demand. So that's a common practice on online auctions, which is called shield bidding, is the act of a seller bidding on their own auction. eBay warned that practice is illegal in many parts of the world, and they prohibit that in the internet on their platform. But on the other hand, it's also the case that sometimes platforms itself might have their own incentives to manipulate the market for a profit. So this is an example of a recent lawsuit by the US Department of Justice against Google by claiming that Google used monopoly practices on their digital advertising market, and they claim that Google manipulate auction mechanisms for profit. So not only we have the incentives of buyers and sellers, but there's often also the case where their own platform might be taking advantage of the market for profit. And I had to say that this lawsuit came last month, but also Google has already been fined by more than $10 billion in Europe for a monopoly practice. So let me give you an example of how Google, how it's alleged that Google have been manipulating the advertising market. So imagine you go to an online advertising web page like New York, you go to a news website like New York Times. New York Times and all the publishers, they might make money from showing advertising on their page. New York Times, what they're going to do is that they would pick their slot on their web page. They would use an API provided by this company called DoubleClick by publishers, which was bought by Google. What this API does is that the API is going to auction that slot in their web page in a market. So what happens that the API is going to offer that slot in many different exchanges, and the exchanges, they bid for the privilege to show an advertisement on that web page. What was claimed is that because Google owns their own exchange and the API used by publishers, Google would wait to see what other exchanges are bidding and then bid on top of other exchanges. Well, you might claim, well, maybe the New York Times is making more money, right? But in fact, they are not. They're just making a penny more, right? They're not really, the New York Times is not really making more money. They're just getting that simple penny that Google bid on top of the competing exchange. And the competing exchange is getting nothing, right? So Google is giving itself an advantage on this market by taking advantage that they control the whole pipeline on this market.
So in this case, what does Google gain here? If let's say if I have an ad that I want to put there, I will have incentive to bid a little bit more. But is it always the case that I always have an ad that I want to put? And
yes, so what Google gets is that suppose Coca-Cola is using this exchange and they want to show an ad. What Coca-Cola is going to see that whenever they are using this exchange, they are never getting to show their ads.
I see.
So Coca-Cola next time they're going to go to Google because they think Google is better, because they're just these exchanges really never had a fair opportunity to compete on that market. So it's a long shot game. So Google is playing the long shot game. They want to have control of the market.
So quick question. So this attack is just like theoretical attack, or it has been
It was
implemented.
It has been implemented. It's called the last look advantage. So Google allegedly they claim to have ended in 2017. It was a very controversial practice, but the lawsuit still brings that and claim that that has not addressed the problem. And I mean, in fact, the lawsuit has 100 pages of things that they claim Google have been doing to manipulate the market. This is just one example of how can a platform take advantage of the market. So the research question I ask here is, how can we design algorithms when the person implementing our algorithm might also be someone that's economically motivated, right? Think about Google. So you're designing an algorithm, and if the person implementing the algorithm might actually have an economic interest in the outcome. So there's many ways you can approach this game. Well, we have users clearly they have their preference, and you have the platform. And there's many ways you can enforce correct behavior. You have regulation, right? You can have antitrust, we have antitrust laws. For the case against Google is claiming they're violating a law. We can use cryptography. We have multi-party computation, commitment schemes. Those are techniques that we can use to try to enforce an algorithm to behave correctly. We have a mechanism design where it's very big in designing incentive mechanisms so that we can incentivize correct behavior. In reputation can also be very valuable, right? Like platforms care about how they are perceived, companies care about how they are perceived on the market, so they might not be willing to manipulate markets that could harm their reputation. So there's many ways you can approach this problem, and I'm going to go over my research where I kind of I don't try to take a single approach on that, but how can actually combine these different approaches to solve this problem of transparency on markets. So to start, I'm going to first talk about the problem of design auctions when that are robust to a very strong adversary. So think a strong adversary being some auctioneer that's trying to make more money than by manipulating the auction. And then I'm going to talk about the problem of designing robust markets for exchange. So that those are very common on blockchains currently. So these are the main application of blockchains currently is actually trading digital assets, where market manipulation is a prevalent problem there. I'm going to also argue how can blockchains help on these two tasks. First, I'm going to say how you can solve this problem without using blockchains, but how can incentives they sometimes might be helpful. Because of that, I'm also going to briefly mention some work on how we can think about designing blockchains that are more sustainable and the incentives behind the incentive challenge behind that. Okay, so for the auction problem, I'm going to show how a way to approach this problem by combining not only incentive design, but also cryptography and reputation. Okay, leveraging these three different branches. How can we try to approach this problem of designing auction that are robust by manipulation by auctioneer? So a little bit of background. So eBay uses the second price auction, which was the auction proposed by Venturyne in 1961. So Venturyne won the Nobel Prize in Economics for this work and others. And this auction is very simple. The high level idea is that we go to the auction, bidders are going to send their bid privately to the auctioneer, and the auctioneer is going to charge the second highest bid to the highest bidder. So you don't pay your bid if you win, you pay the second highest. And the reason eBay loves this auction and a lot of internet applications love this auction because it's in the best interest for bidders to bid the maximum they're willing to pay, because they pay the minimum they would have to bid anyway to win the auction. There's a property known as strategy proof.
Could you read this property again?
Yes, so for every bidder, it's in your best interest to bid the maximum you're willing to pay, because whatever you pay if you win is the minimum you would have to bid to win the item. So if I bid 80, that doesn't harm me because I still pay 20. So I could bid 60, it could be 100, it doesn't matter. Whatever I pay would be the second highest bid. So for that reason, this bidder doesn't have incentive to be strategic. Okay, that might be the case, but this is really assuming that you have to trust the auctioneer, right? So imagine this eBay somehow is malicious and eBay comes and say, oh, actually Bob bid $79. And so try to picture your interaction with eBay is you're in a computer, you don't see anyone, right? eBay just telling you how much you have to pay. So you really have to trust what eBay is telling you. If they're malicious, they could lie about how much Bob is bidding and charge you more. So there is a very strong assumption here that you need to trust the auctioneer. And that's what we want to realize. There's actually evidence that happens in practice. Sellers on eBay, they might, there's cases where sellers bidding on their own auction on eBay to try to create a sense of demand. And in general, some places that is illegal. So like you might be doing something that is illegal. And there is evidence that happen in practice. But well, that's saying that eBay might be colluding with the seller, right? But in general, you might say, well, eBay doesn't collude with the seller, you can trust eBay. But in practice, there's still a lot of suspicions on this auction. So this is an example of a buyer that claims that some seller was bidding on their own auction, and they're complaining that that eBay doesn't have a feature that allow you to complain to eBay that you think someone is bidding on their own auction. And they go on to say that well, eBay makes profit from the commission. So if someone is bidding on their own auction, that actually helps eBay. So this creates this very problematic problem of confidence. Like buyers might lose confidence on your platform if they think something is being manipulated. So it's not only a problem if you don't trust eBay, but it's also a problem for eBay if buyers think that people might be manipulating your mechanism. And you might even wonder, well, how can eBay even detect if someone is bidding on their own auction? That's not that easy task, right? Someone can have a fake identity and be bidding with fake identities. Okay, so let me quickly introduce the model of how we model this problem of design options. They're robust to manipulation. So you're going to consider a very simple setting of a single item for sale. Buyers, they have independent valuations. We assume the valuations are private, which means they are only known by that buyer. But the valuations are drawn from a population, from a distribution that's known. So you know, imagine you have a lot of data where you know where the valuations are drawn. I'm going to assume a setting where that's called permissionless, which means that anyone can join the auction and participate. So think again, eBay, anyone can come in and join the auction if they want. We're going to assume that the auction is centralized in the sense that bidders communicate only with the auctioneer. Again, this example of eBay, when you go to eBay, you only communicate with the auctioneer. You don't even know who else is in the auction. And finally, we say bidders have voluntary participation, which means that they can stop playing the game at any point in time. So you cannot force someone to keep playing the game. If they want, they can just leave at any point.
A quick question for the third point. Does that mean that if I bid something, I can retreat?
Yes. But as I'm going to show later, to solve this problem, you're going to require bidders to deposit a collateral.
Okay, I see.
So if they abort, they're going to pay a penalty.
I see.
So, okay, what's our goal? So our goal is to design an auction that's revenue optimal. So we want to be good for the sellers. So this problem is completely solved by Meyerson in 81. Again, he not the person who won a Nobel Prize in 2007 for his work on mechanism design. So for example, an optimal auction in this setting would be a second price auction with what we call a Meyerson reserve price. So a reserve is like as if the auctioneer was allowed to bid on the auction in the beginning without knowing the bids of anyone else. That's what the reserve price is. We want an auction to be incentive compatible for bidders. So that means that bidders have incentive to bid truthfully, to review their valuation. And the third one is what we call credibility, which in high level means that the auction should also be incentive compatible for the auctioneer. The auctioneer also should have incentive to follow the auction that they are promising to implement. However, there's a constraint here that the auctioneer is only going to cheat if cheating cannot be detected by the buyers. The motivation for that is we're going to assume this auctioneer has a reputation. He is willing to cheat as long as buyers cannot detect that they are cheating. So that's where reputation comes from. Also, this was formally proposed by Venturyne in 2020. One option that is credible is the first price option, because we're in this option where if you win the item, you pay your bid. So it's not hard to see that the optimal thing you could do in a first price auction is just to give the item to the highest bidder, and you're clearly going to get the maximum revenue from that. So that's an option that's credible. A second price is clearly not credible, because if I lie about the second highest bid, bidders cannot detect it.
A question? Can I think of auctioneer as the seller?
Yeah, that is, yeah, you can get them as being the same person. Okay, so you might think, okay, why are we introducing this assumption on the auctioneer? Like, why can't we just solve it with crypto, right? In the crypto seminar, like, why can't we do MPC? We can, but the reason is that will not work on the settings for two reasons for you. Some of the ways people approach is that you could use public encryption, where the assumption on public encryption is that you assume that you know everyone that's in the auction beforehand, which is, it's not realistic if you go to eBay, like you don't know anyone who's in the auction. The second assumption is, if you want to use a multi-party computation, is that you require what's known as an honest majority. So we are in the setting where everything is centralized. The auctioneer, all communication is taking place over the auctioneer. If you want to use an NPC, you often, there's two ways you can think about it. You can run an NPC with bidders, or you can have multiple auctioneers. But you require some type of majority on this. You require a large fraction of these people to be honest. So recall again, you're in the same way anyone can join the system. So it's free for someone to create a fake identity, and it's just not possible to run an NPC, a secure NPC, if someone can create fake identities on your system.
I just want to mention honest majority is necessary for guaranteed output delivery. If you're fine with the auction being failed, you can tolerate like up to a -1 correction.
Yeah.
Using secure with abort mathematical computation. So either it runs correctly or the auction fails.
Yeah, so that's so that would work. The problem is that your auction would be vulnerable to some denial of service attack, because someone could crash it. You also want to make sure that no one can break your auction. Okay, so that's why we think about using, we model the auctioneer as incentives. And however, if you want to have those three properties of being revenue, option, incentive compatible for bidders and the auctioneer, the Aquapoint actually showed this is not possible unless you're happy on using what is known as the ascending price auction, where the main limitation though is that the communication cost is unbounded in the worst case. So you cannot bound how many rounds this auction would take to complete. So that would not be practical in many settings, like you're running an auction, that would be very expensive.
If you're willing to make some assumptions, for example, like in cryptography, you can make different assumptions and then you could have different possibilities. So I wonder whether this result assumes some assumptions.
Yeah, so that's so call this is an information theoretical impossibility. So that's exactly what this work I'm gonna talk about now, is how we overcome this impossibility result by introducing the assumption that you can use cryptographic commitments, and an assumption on the distribution. So there's two assumptions that we have: a commitment scheme and an assumption on the distribution where valuations are drawn. And with that, we can construct an option that revenue optimal and incentive compatible known for bidders in the auctioneer, and that terminates in 2 rounds of communication, 2 rounds because of the commitment scheme. Any questions about this result? So a little bit of background, the commitment scheme, I don't think I need to explain much. So yeah, so it's basically a two-round protocol where bidder can commit to a value. The auctioneer doesn't see what that value is in the first round. Later on, the bidder can reveal their value, and you're going to be convinced that whatever they committed in the first phase was really their value that they committed. Okay, so what is the deferred revelation auction that we proposed? So it's a two-round auction which proceeds as follows. So bidders are going to cryptographically commit to their bid by sending to the auctioneer. Then the auctioneer is going to forward the cryptographic commitment of all other bidders. So that ends the commitment phase. In the next phase, the bidders are going to reveal their value by revealing their value in their relevance. And finally, we are going to implement the second price auction on the revealed bids. Okay, so why this doesn't work? The reason is what is known as the CPU attack. The Alice comes and she bids 80, she commits to 80. The auctioneer doesn't see that. But what the auctioneer could do is that he could create a ton of fake bids. And once Alice reveals her value, he's gonna go to Alice and hide any bid that was above 80 and review only the ones that are below 80. And he's gonna tell Alice, oh, these people just refuse to participate. So, and that's valid because there's no way for Alice to know what really happened.
Well, you can simply use a Merkle tree to basically solve this problem, right? So basically you can have a vector commitment to all the bids you have, so you don't have an inconsistent set.
You want to guarantee some order or nothing?
Order? I don't think so. You just need to have any arbitrary vector commitment.
Wait, what's the vector community?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
The auctioneer can just say that even with the vector, you can still say that 81 to end and not. Because the commitment is just that would just be in the first one, not the second one.
But actually, like, if using there's a distribution, wouldn't this happen with a very small probability and as large?
Well, they can still cheat, so it doesn't have to be like the optimal strategy to cheat.
Yeah, so. Yeah, I mean, and. Yeah, I mean, they actually can always extract the value of Alice basically by making, I mean, if you just reduce the space and increase n.
Yeah.
You can always make Alice space the highest bid smaller than her value that he committed to.
In that case, like, will there be a non-malleability issue?
Yes, so yeah, so I didn't mention, but also in practice, you want out the commitment to be non-malleable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
otherwise I can just do some modification on the commitment.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, that's in general, malleability is easy. You can just ask Alice to sign her bid before committing to it. So to solve this problem, as I said, what we do is introduce a collateral. So we ask each bidder to deposit a collateral before bidding. And one way you can implement it is by depositing the collateral to the auctioneer. And the winning bidder, he must receive the collateral of every bidder that refused to review their bid. So if the auctioneer hides fake bids above 80, if you want to convince Alice that she's the higher bidder, he has to pay the collateral of every bid that aborted the auction. And if these bidders are really not real bidders, then he has to take it out of his own pocket. So our main results, so we phrase in terms of the assumption on the distribution of bidder valuations, and that's very related to auction, the auction theory of Meyerson. So basically what we show is that if the auction proposed would be credible, or the auction that would not have incentive to manipulate the auction, if the collateral is at least what we call the optimal reserve price, which is given by Meyerson. So we need to define what the optimal auction is. Meyerson gives us what the optimal reserve price of the auction is. And if the collateral is the Meyerson reserve price for this class of distributions known as MHR, then the auction would be credible. And that's very nice because a bidder, you're basically saying the bidder is never required to deposit a collateral that's higher than their value, as long as if they have any hope of winning the auction. Because if your value is smaller than the reserve price, you should not even be in the auction. The reserve price is public, everyone knows it. So you're never going to be required to deposit a collateral bigger than your value. But there is this extension of MHR called office from the regular, where this auction is not always credible. In fact, for any collateral K, you can show that the auction can profit from manipulating the auction. Any questions about this?
Sorry, why are these two distributions?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna define it. So these are an assumption on the distribution of valuation. So we call the values of bidders are drawn from the population. So as long as the population satisfies this assumption, the auction would be credible. But these are like a standard assumptions in auction theory.
What does MHR stand for?
It's monotone hazard rate. So yeah, okay, one examples of MHR distributions are like uniform, exponential distribution with exponential tail would be MHR. Pareto distributions are not MHR. They are alpha strongly regular. So that would violate. So like more heavy tail distributions, they are not MHR. More exponential tail distributions tend to be MHR.
But isn't Pareto like more real world setting?
Yes, so I'm gonna show an extension on on that. So in this work, this follow-up work, we ask, can we extend this for beyond MHR? So we're using blockchain. So we actually show for office from the regular, the auction is not credible, right? For any K. We ask if we implemented the third revelation auction over blockchain would be credible. We show that if the collateral is at least the number of bidders times the reserve price, then the auction would be credible. Where R is the reserve price and N is the number of bidders. What's interesting though, you still have a negative result here, where the boundary of this class office from the regular is called the class of regular distributions. We have this boundary here where we still can show that the auction would not be credible. In fact, there's a distribution where the optimal revenue of if the auctioneer was honest is 1, but if he cheats, he could get as much revenue as he wanted.
Questions? So for this slide and the previous slides, the impossibility is for any auctions.
No,
or
just
just
only for that particular deferred revelation auction. The impossibility is for any collateral.
oh, I see, I see. So it's possible that even without, let's say, the previous slide, they may exist down.
Yeah.
Good question. So how do you make the collateral related to the number of bidders? Because when you participate, you should know how much collateral you should pay. But at that time, you don't know like how many bidders will come up to you.
So yes, the way it works is that you need to have a first round where the people interest come, the number of the bidders interested come to the auction, and the auctioneer counts them. And now he tells everyone how many bidders are in the auction. In fact, what is auction is running over the blockchain, so you can see how many bidders register to participate in the auction.
Oh, I see. So for example, I can register and if I see there are too many bidders, I don't want to pay this collateral, I can quit.
Yeah, so that's one limitation of, there's like one of the questions reduced use, because there's no ideal. Because here now bidders might be required to deposit collateral higher than that value. That's the limitation of this.
There's a problem, like you can create a lot of big accounts. And just to make the super large and then everyone quits. So
It sounds something like denial of service.
yeah.
I mean, they should have to deposit collateral.
Okay, so let me make sure. So let's say 100 person registered and 50 of them refuse to put collateral. In
Oh,
here,
then you
N-
don't count that. We only count people who actually deposit.
so N is 50 is.
Hmm?
N is 50 is like only the 50% really put the collateral there. Okay, but isn't that the amount they put depends on how many people register in the first round, which is 100?
But it's bigger than 50, so it's fine.
Yeah.
But the thing is, how much collateral I put is related to how many people put collateral.
Mhm. No, but you number of people register, say N 100. So everyone deposit 100 or drop off. So that's say like only 50 deposit, but whoever deposit that's bigger than what is already bigger than if there was 50, because your collateral is 100 times R, you just need 50 times R.
So it's there.
Going back to the previous example, what if the auctioneer has zero cost in preventing denial of service amount too, right? Because for example, if the max honest bid was, let's say 100, I can still open my 101 bid and then refuse to open all the other ones. But that collateral just went to me, right? So it's not costing me to do the denial of service there.
Sorry, you're
So let's say there's the one honest bidder, so the max honest bid is 100 per item. Then let's say I'm just trying to do denial of service, then I can open the 101 bid, that's my bid. And then I can refuse to open 102 to 200 or whatever, but all that collateral is coming from me, so it's actually costing me zero to do denial of service.
But you are the seller, you're the one who sells the seller.
Like if you sell it to someone else, you're gaining the revenue.
Yeah, so I'm getting zero revenue. But I can still do denial of service, right?
You can do it.
You're like
but that's
denying yourself.
There's no problem.
Oh, I guess I was thinking more of like. Cause then if you know, because then you learn the honest bids, so then like if you refuse to do on that one, then you sort of know on the next time. Sort of how much you can charge. I guess, but I guess maybe that's not true.
Oh, that is like the repeated.
yeah,
That's
that's
the-
the
Is more.
So I guess it's
we
not.
have the different.
yeah. So so there's a concept in auction, like in art auction, there's a concept of burning the item. If you run an auction and you don't sell in art, especially, your item loses value.
I see.
Like you go put a Picasso for 100 million and no one is interested. Pretty sure everyone is gonna have a lower value later. So getting a little bit into question.
Wait, can you explain again why the previous slide, like, wait, why can't like 1,000 people register, but with no intent to actually pay the collateral, and then like if 1,000 people register, the collateral is gonna be huge, and like it's still denying service. Really, you don't have to have money to hire.
I mean, practically in blockchains, there's a cost, even for registering intent, you have to pay a cost, which I'm not defining here, like there's transaction fees. They are beyond the scope, but you're right, you can do it.
Another way is if you are the 500 people registering, you pay 500 hours first. And then, you know. Okay. Never mind.
So a little bit intuition why blockchains help. So the idea is because when you're running a centralized auction, where all the communication is taking place over the auctioneer, what the auctioneer can do is that they can manipulate the input by creating fake bits, but they can also do something more. They can manipulate the algorithm itself in the sense that they can manipulate the order where messages are exchanged. In the blockchain setting, they can only manipulate the input. They cannot manipulate the order where messages are exchanged anymore, because the blockchain allows you to implement a broad kind of like a public channel where everyone can communicate. So if someone is getting the message, then everyone else is also getting the message. So that's the reason where some deviations that were happening here, they are not possible anymore in this setting. So we have another work that extends this to even regular distributions. So the auction is different, so it's not the deferred relation auction anymore. On a high level, they increase that now if this auction, the collateral is adaptive, it might change over time. It's not that you run auction anymore, the collateral might change. But we can show the expected number of rounds is constant. But in the worst case, the number of rounds could still be unbounded. So on expectation is constant, but it could be unbounded. And in that case, you can have a credible auction for also regular distributions. So in this part, I show you the start of what we try to design auctions against this very strong adversary, which is an auctioneer that's trying to manipulate his own auction. Some techniques we use is like combining, we really had to combine all these different aspects, like we had to combine cryptography, because use commitments, incentives, right, collaterals, payments, so those are all related to incentives. And credibility was really rounded around the concept of the auctioneer having a reputation that he's not willing to do deviations that could be detected by peers.
So basically, the highlight of this line for it is that the winner can take the letter. Yeah, summarize as that. Yeah. Okay.
Let me move on to the problem of market design in exchanges.
Quick questions.
Yes.
So in this auctions, the winner can take the collateral. Does that influence my estimation of the value? For example, if I just want to buy this item, which is worth 100 to me, but I maybe expect like some people maybe they will go offline. I can take their collateral, so that will influence my evaluation for this item.
Yeah, that's right. But we don't. Yeah, like in the analysis, we assume that dealers are not really expecting that to happen. So in general, the utility of the bidder, the bidder could get it, but we think that's in the analysis, we assume no one is dropping out, and because if someone drop out, there is nothing you can. That's independent of your actions. So in exchange design, so trading has been, so let's start with this news from Forbes magazine. So it's basically talking about this problem of market manipulations in blockchains, where this is a setting where currently blockchains, they provide transparency, but there is this new trend where miners in blockchains, they have a lot of influence on how they add, remove, and reorder transactions on blockchains. That's called the miner extractable value. And it has been one of the main problems in blockchains currently is this power of miners being able to manipulate the market for profit. So here an estimate by flash bots that users have lost almost $700 million since 2020 by this type of market manipulations. You might be wondering why it's not really growing anymore, and the reason is because flash bots decided to auction the opportunity for you to manipulate the market. So they don't count the revenue on these auctions as MEV, but they also have an estimate of how much revenue they give to miners once on these auctions. So for example, weekly around $5 million are won on these auctions by bots auctioning, buying the privilege to manipulate upfront money blockchain markets.
So can I understand like this? So it's not because the problem is solved. Like problem is like our source they do.
Yes, the client, the story that they're making the costs explicit.
Okay.
So, well, if you're, so okay, where does MEV is coming from? It's mostly from trading. And the reason is because blockchains really create these new markets around digital assets, and there's like primarily two ways you can trade digital assets. One is you can use a centralized exchange like Coinbase, where in a high level what you do, you transfer your crypto to our exchange, the exchange executes the transactions for you. Now the exchange is the custodian, they basically own your tokens on your behalf. And a decentralized exchange allow you to directly trade digital assets in a blockchain contract. So you remove that intermediary. Some trade-offs, centralized exchanges generally gonna have higher trading fees. There is a concern about transparency. So for an FTX was an example of a centralized exchange where they were receiving money from clients and they were trading it. They were doing things that they should not have been doing it that. And so this was the exchange that collapsed in November. So that's another critique against this design approach. One problem though with decentralized exchanges, that although they provide more transparency, that does not imply that they are robust to market manipulation. In fact, they make market manipulation easier because everything becomes public. So the way it works is that when you are on a trade, traders, they send the transactions to miners. Miners, they pick an order where transactions execute. That we call the execution ordering. And this order determines the price that you pay for your trades. And the reason because trades execute sequentially, and then the transactions execute in the blockchain. What miners can do though, because they control the construction of the blocks, they can add, remove, or reorder transactions inside a block. So for example, imagine transaction T2 was buying Ethereum. So if you're giving intent to buy Ethereum, what the miner can do is that they buy Ethereum before you. That makes the price of Ethereum go up, then they execute your buy order, and then they immediately sell the Ethereum they just bought with transaction T4, and they profit from the difference. So that's known as sandwich attack. And most of that $700 million have been lost by this type of manipulations. So in this work, given this question, the way we approach this problem is, again, we have traders, they have preferences, and we have the exchange, and it has been clear that crypto has been struggling to solve this problem. So we think it in a different way. We think about how we can combine incentives and again, this concept of reputation to address the problem of market manipulation on decentralized exchanges. What we do is the following. So in this paper, we've joined with David Parks. What we do is that as before traders, they're going to send a transaction to a sequencer. So think a sequencer now as an entity that has a reputation, someone that's not willing to harm their reputation. The sequencer is going to pick an execution ordering from a sequencing rule. In the paper, we give one called the greedy sequencing rule. So the sequence rule constrains which orders are valid. And this execution ordering is going to be executed in the blockchain. Okay, so what we guarantee is that the sequencing rule is verifiable. You can verify the execution ordering once it executes. It really belongs, it could really be an output of the sequencing rule. Note that doesn't mean that the sequencer could not manipulate the input. They could still be manipulating the input. But as long as it's satisfied, is a valid output of the sequencing rule. So the sequencer can still be manipulating the input. but they are constrained on the output.
Wait, why can the miner still insert transactions into, for example, this sequence?
Yeah, so there is a way in certain blockchains, not all, you can define the execution ordering. You can basically define the content of the block before but what happens, especially after proof of stake in Ethereum, what the miner can do is that they can give away to someone else to define the content of that block.
Okay.
So that's possible in proof of stake and not in proof of work.
So you need to assume that the miner the miner needs to basically give over the power to insert the transaction.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's ways you can implement where you can implement this on directly in the contract. But for now, for simplicity, just think that the miner cannot in something like when the contract you say this transaction, this block is only valid if it's satisfying the sequencing rule. So that could be verified efficiently on the blockchain. But for now, just thinks that the miner cannot manipulate the order. This was already defined by someone else.
So if everyone can verify that it obeys the sequencing rule, so why not just miner just compute the sequence by itself? So we don't need a sequencer.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, the miner and the sequencer could be the same person. Okay, so what's the guarantees that we give, even though the input could be manipulated? Is the following: we guarantee that for any transaction A, one of the following is gonna happen. The first one say that the trader detects that the execution order violates the rule. So if the sequencer has a reputation, they don't want that to happen. The second one say that the execution price that the transaction A receives is as good as if that transaction was the only one to execute. So that's great because that's the price you were expecting to get. The third one say that you could be getting a worse price, but provably, so this is an incentive catch here. Provably, this is happening because of competition, not because of market manipulation. In other words, if the sequencer was manipulating your transaction for this to happen, they would actually be losing money if that was happening. That's why we can say so this is happening due to competition, not due to manipulation. Let's say there's two transactions. A classic example: there's two transactions that want to buy Ethereum. The one that executes last is gonna receive a worse execution price. That's not because of manipulation, that's just the market. That's different from a sandwich attack where someone is just creating a transaction after seeing yours.
Wait, what? If competition can happen, then why can the miner just be the competitor?
They could,
Yeah, they could, and then still the problem still exists, right?
but that's not, that's not but that's not like that's not the sandwich attack. Like the miner is indifferent about your transaction. They basically don't profit by executing your transaction.
Okay.
Let's say you have a transaction and you're the miner.
Mhm.
What you could have done is just ignore my transaction, execute only yours.
Right.
We don't consider that a violation of the protocol. In general, you cannot force a miner to do anything anyway. Like I cannot force a miner to do the transaction in the block. So the approach, again, it combines incentives because their sequencing rule constrains the incentive for the miner, and reputation because the sequencing rule is verifiable. You can really check the sequence rule satisfy certain properties. So any questions?
That's like, it would be better to wrap up, but I reserved this room till 6, so take your time.
I'll finish. Yeah, so in the last part, we think, okay, the blockchain, the blockchain allows us to address this problem of market manipulation in auctions. They can be helpful in decentralized exchanges. They can help design more transparent exchanges, and by using new techniques, we can make these exchanges more transparent and secure too. So we might ask, hey, how can we design these blockchains in practice? One constraint though is that, as most of you might know, proof of work consumes a lot of energy. So from 2021 was that Bitcoin was a country that consumed more energy than now, but 28 countries in the planet. So there has been a lot of interest in designing new protocols to address this problem. The proof of stake has been the primary way to approach this problem, where proof of stake is a civil approved leader selection mechanism, where it's a mechanism to select who's gonna get to propose a block. One constraint that we have for proof of stake is you wanna make so in general, it's a protocol where what you want is that someone that owns X fraction of the stake must be the leader during extraction of the rounds. So there's a few reasons why you might want that. As I said, the leader gets to choose who gets the privilege to use the blockchain. They receive transaction fees. They might be nowadays there's MEV, which is even more profitable than everything else. So there is a lot of reason why someone wants to create as many blocks as possible. And in this work with Sally, Weinberg, and you, we asked if existing proof of stake protocols and the selection protocols are fair. Here we studied algorithms with the selection mechanism. We show that it's not fair. In fact, for any fraction of the stake, it's also profitable to deviate. You're always missing out if you're not deviating. So that's bad news, but it's still open to understand what's the long-term implications if you have a protocol where being honest is not the optimal thing for you to be doing. Our main result was to show that if you own less than 38% of the stake, though, then you can only increase the fractional rounds where you're the leader by a factor of 3.
Isn't it very big? Like 3 times.
Yeah. So if you don't know if it's tight, but potentially it could be very problematic if that's very high. So we don't know if that number is tight.
For example, let's say X being 35%, then it almost controls everything. No?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that could be a problem.
But this is only an upper bound, not
Upper bound.
Oh, I see.
So in another work, we asked if we could, what would happen if we replace the proof of work in Bitcoin by some external source of randomness? Right? The only thing we're doing is replacing proof of work by an external source of randomness to pick a leader, and it's using the longest chain rule. And we asked if Bitcoin would be fair. So some prior results. So our paper in Algorithmic, we show that the threshold where being honest is a natural equilibrium is 0. So it's never natural equilibrium to be honest. In Bitcoin with proof of work, we know that the threshold where honest mining is a natural equilibrium is 32.9%. If no one owns more than 32.9% of the mining power of Bitcoin, then in this regime, Bitcoin honest mining will be a natural equilibrium. In this work, we show that the threshold for proof of Bitcoin with external run is actually different, which was surprising. Where we show that if honest mining is not a natural equilibrium if any agent owns more than 32.5% of the stake. So to show a clear separation between proof of work and proof of stake, even with external run. So so it's a strong assumption that you assume you have external run, and even though you cannot get the same threshold as Bitcoin, We give also a lower bound, which means that if no one owns 11.8% of the stake, then the honest is in equilibrium. So in general, so yeah, so this is the gap. We don't know what the threshold happens, but it's on this region. So to conclude, so in this talk, the way we motivated by is by arguing that, well, we spend a lot of time interacting with online platforms. We have a lot of influence of what we see, what we consume. In general, we have very high standards of what we expect from platforms. Sometimes you don't even know what we want, right? You want it to be fair, like you don't want it that to be manipulating the algorithm. So those are like high level things we might want to be transparent. And I argue how we can use cryptography incentives and reputation design to actually design platforms that are more transparent. And that's not only for because users want it, but there's also the aspect that transparency might increase consumer confidence. That might actually be good for your platform if consumers trust it. They can really feel confident they are not being manipulated. There's a lot of interesting questions of like how you can extend these insights for other platforms. Regulation, like how we can model, bring these new insights for like how you can regulate these platforms. In general, regulation in tech is very slow. Like for Google, the lawsuit against Google argued that they have been manipulating markets since 2007. So we have more than 10 years and we still don't know what to do about it. So hopefully we can think on how we can not only bring these engineering tools that can help us shape these markets and make them more fair and transparent. So thank you very much.
May I ask a question about the true randomness for blockchain part?
Yes.
Okay, so there's part, let's see. So it doesn't even make sense to talk about like real randomness for proof of work, right? Because everybody needs to somehow like use hash function, which is not truly random.
I would say proof of work generates perfect randomness. I mean, assuming hash functions are really random oracles, I think it would be fine to assume they're perfect source of randomness.
So here, the model for POS with Beacon, that simply means that everybody deposits some money and then they just run an election and everybody gets elected with really the probability of their portion.
Yeah.
So that's model.
Yeah. And you use the longest chain rule to resolve conflicts. So people can propose blocks and you solve it using the longest chain rule.
So it's like for every time slot, somebody gets elected.
Yeah.
But why would there be 4 if you're using a centralized randomness?
Because someone could be the leader and withhold their block.
Okay.
So I can refuse to review my block.
Oh, I see. So it's like selfish mind.
It's like something.
thing. Okay. I see. So you're assuming that the block reward is uniform, right? So you have to ensure that every block.
Yeah, so
That's
yeah,
the
that
same
function
value.
here, when I mean equilibrium, I mean the payoff for an agent is the fraction of rounds where they are leader,
Okay, that's the uniform side.
the payoff.
Yeah, because there are some like following upward. I think they call it like. I don't know, they incorporate like different other rewards for different blocks, and then you could have totally different results if you don't have uniform reward for every block. So that could destroy the
like transaction fees.
like transaction fee, for example, some transaction has really high fee, and then it's very like appealing for one miner to include that transaction, then
Yeah,
one block could become very, very valuable compared to other blocks. So we could have
Yeah.
different things.
yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, here we're assuming our blocks are the same,
Okay.
and you're trying to maximize the fraction, not the absolute value.
Um, okay. So do you need to assume the pool of the deposit cannot like increase boundedly? So basically you need to have a static pool. Is that true?
You mean the stake changing or?
Yeah, could the state change?
Yeah, so here we don't assume we assume it's not changing, and the reason is more like we are understand that this particular state is beyond the symmetric equilibrium.
Okay,
Um,
so you can assume that, for example, for like a small time slot, that the pool doesn't fluctuate too much.
yeah,
Okay,
but you really think about this current state is a symmetric equilibrium or not, so that's the question. It doesn't matter if state is changing over time, because you can just ask that question again after the state change, the stake pool changes, right?
I see. Because there could be some problem, even from the proof of work model. Like if you have like fluctuating
Yeah, the
total
hash
computation power, then you could have totally different problems. So I'm not sure whether that will come up in this model anyway.
Yeah. No, here's more like, so here we have assume this random beacon, which is already very abstract. You assume it's
Okay.
coming in discrete steps. And then, so like one example, I don't know if you heard the NIST, the US government runs a NIST random beacon every minute.
Yeah.
The output randomness. The question.